Glenn Hegar was elected as our 36th Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts in November of 2014. He is Texas's Chief Financial Officer, the state's treasurer, the check writer, the tax collector, procurement officer, and a revenue estimator. He is a 1993 graduate of Texas A&M University. Any of those out there? Okay. And a graduate of St. Mary's University, where he earned a Master's of Arts in his law degree. And at the University of Arkansas, he earned a Master of Laws as well. Most importantly, Glenn is a member of this community who lived through this storm with his family at their home in Katy. So, please join me in welcoming our State of Texas Comptroller, Glenn Hegar.
That's part of what we do, in part as here as the Chief Financial Officer and Controller of Public Accounts here in the state of Texas. And I want to talk a little bit about a few different things that economic impacts of Hurricane Harvey, and talk about some of the things that we need to do going forward. And every time I talk about the hurricane, just as I was in the Metroplex earlier this week, I was at an event with several different ladies I got to know over the years, and one of them, the first lady that I met when I went into the hotel to check into, she's over in Orange County, which is obviously right across from the Louisiana border on this side of Texas, and I'd asked her, I said, Sheila, how are you, and how did you come out? And she said, well, in fact, we had, I think it was 12 feet of water in our house, and much like Lucy, wasn't able to get in for 2 weeks before the waters resided. And then later on that day, a lady who lives over in Kingwood that I've known for a very long time, very sweet lady, very good supporter, Helen, she came up the next morning at breakfast, gave me a hug, we got talking. I said, well, how are you? And she said, well, we're doing great, we're doing fine. I said, well, how are you and your husband Ron doing? And of course, they're another flood victim. And west of, just back south of Katy, where we call home, we back up to Buffalo Bayou, and people asked me, said, well, what was it like? And I said, well, we had a raging river, but our house was dry, so I have this survivor's guilt, much like I assume a lot of you as you drive around and you see people that are continuing to try to put their lives back together. And if you take a storm that is this large and this massive, I was mentioning just a few minutes ago, and tomorrow I'll testify up in Austin, the Senate Finance Committee, talking about what is the impacts of Hurricane Harvey. And you really have to break it down into several categories. One, from my angle that I look at it, as the state of Texas, which, oh, by the way, the 254 counties that make up Texas, the 12 economic regions that make up Texas, 12.3 million people that work in Texas, an economic engine of $1.7 trillion economy, that, oh, by the way, is the 10th largest economy in the entire world. You live in a state that is literally the 10th largest economy. If you take the greater Houston area, which obviously we're in, the take-home pay of people, of all of us that live in the greater Houston area, would be the 14th largest state in our nation. The Metroplex would also be the 14th largest state in our nation from a take-home pay. And so my point being is, even though in the past when we've seen natural disasters in Texas, whether it's other hurricanes, say for example, another one that's personal is Hurricane Ike. Well, Hurricane Ike impacted the state treasury a little over $300 million. Now that's a lot of money, $300 million. But when you take in the size and scope of knowing that billions of dollars of value and property values have been destroyed, and in fact, you also have to look at it from the local communities. Say, for example, the wildfire several years ago in 2011 and 2013, a couple years later, over in Bastrop County and Waller County, and then you go up into West Texas. Those two storm events cost the state and those wildfires a couple $100 million. Well, tomorrow I'll mention how this one, because it goes from the Sabine River all the way to the edge of Corpus Christi. So we forget that, yes, it impacted people that we know here in Texas, or here in the Houston area, but it impacted so many more individual lives. And in fact, the state of Texas this time, it's probably going to cost the state, as you and I, the taxpayers, between $2 and $2.5 billion. Just to show the size and the scope, significantly more than any other event that we've ever had. I mean, you all see how homes are destroyed on the individual level. So when you look at this event, you look at it, one, from the size of the state of Texas, and yes, it'll impact the state, but in fact, from a revenue side, the irony is, anybody who has been impacted by this storm, when they begin the rebuild effort, what are they doing? They're purchasing items that go back into the economy, and actually they pay taxes on it. And so even though the state of Texas is roughly going to have a cost this time, we would in fact see right after a storm, there's almost somewhat about an uptick in activity. And so the question depends in the Houston area, because once people ask me, well, how's the Houston economy? I say, well, the traffic is just as bad now as it was before the storm event. Now, if you go to other communities, you go down to Rockport or Port Aransas, which I represented when I was in the state Senate district, you talk about two communities that are absolutely devastating. A school district in Aransas County, which is Aransas County ISD, has one campus, K through 12, one campus. And in fact, the week after the storm, they said, we are closed indefinitely, and we highly suggest any student register somewhere else. Well, the closest school is Corpus is 30 minutes away, or Victoria, which is an hour away. And so my point being is just to make this from several different angles. If it's the state of Texas, yes, the state of Texas is going to have a significant hit, but again, it's the 10th largest economy in the world. We're going to move right past this from an impact. But if you're one of those communities, it depends on the size and the scope, whether it's on the city level, the county level, the ISD level, it can be significantly impacting those communities. And then you go and take it to the personal level of people that have lost their automobiles, $500,000 automobiles that have been wiped out. You've probably seen as you drive down the road, just parking lots full, pastures full of cars, which all happen to be $5 billion worth of value just wiped away. Or then if your home is destroyed, much less the personal impact that it is to you as an individual is significant. And Lucy, when you were mentioning it earlier, I was thinking about my 3 young kids, because on Saturday we had them in our bedroom because we kept having tornadoes all around. You know, we're trying to play board games, but then we thought, my wife and I think about what your 3 kids, you moved, and then you got to explain to them, we don't get to go home. You don't get to go home. And what your husband built in the backyard is destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. And I mean, you can't imagine what that impacts to a kid's psyche. It's pretty devastating. And so my point being is, yes, from the state of Texas, it's a big fiscal cost, but we're going to get over it. As a community, we'll eventually get over it. But there will be some smaller communities that, in fact, they'll never recover. I mean, the mayor of Rockport, who's a good friend of mine, I've known for a very long time, he had mentioned, he said, 1/3 of the community is just devastated and gone. 1/3 of the businesses haven't even opened up shop again. And in fact, they're probably not coming back. So you're talking about a decade. You say, well, Glenn, why would you talk about something, if we're here to talk about the Houston Food Bank, we're here to talk about Houston, well, in part because the size and the scope of this event is so big and so large, it's more than just Houston. It's more than just Katy, where I get to call home with my 3 kids. And so that's one reason I wanted to mention to it. And so there's a difference between the loss of revenue, and there's a difference between the expense and the cost that goes into it. And where do we go with the road to recovery? I was mentioning Amy when I told my 3 kids, they always want to know, where are you going this week, Dad? Because I get to live in a car a lot. Maybe some of you do. I bet if we did a mileage per week, I bet I'd beat you. When this state is a very big state. And so my son, every Sunday night when we're putting the kids to bed, Jonah will always ask, so what's the plan this week? Or what do you mean? Well, no, what he means is, Dad, where are you going? And my wife is a managing lawyer in one of the law firms here. She gets to travel some, so he always wants to know which parent is gone and who's going to be here. And so last night I said, well, I'm staying here in Houston and Katy area. I'm going to give a speech tomorrow. My oldest daughter, Claire, she was like, who's the group? And I said, the Houston Food Bank. And so we volunteered at the food bank before, and she just said, I love the Houston Food Bank. So on behalf of Claire and the amazing work that y'all do, really my point of bringing that up is not to make it personal about the Hegars and Claire loving the Houston Food Bank and volunteering there, is to make a point that your contributions, your donations, whether it's in money and or time, is helping put lives back together. There are people in our community who are not going to be able to have their homes put back together anytime soon. They don't have the resources. They don't have the funds. They don't have the capabilities. And think about not only their homes, but in fact just to worry about where are they going to have the next meal come from. And that's not going to change in the next week or two. That's going to be a very long effort. So thank y'all for what you're doing for the food bank. Now, what happened? Well, we know a lot of rain got dumped in this area. But in fact, if you go to Fort Bend County, where I call home, I live on the north side of Fort Bend County, from the north side to the south side, do you know it only drops about 60 feet? So what does that mean? It means it's real flat. And then if you go north towards Hockley area, which is where I grew up, it gets a little bit hillier when you get to Hockley, but just south of there, it's real flat. And so when you have all this water dumped into an area, yes, every stream fills up, but over in the Cypress watershed, which goes up into Waller County, when all that water gets dumped on the tax day flood, much like this flood, much like what happened in 1934 in the Houston area when so much of Houston was flooded, there was so much water, and when it's flat, it's kind of like a bowl, but not a bowl that goes straight up like a vase, but a bowl that's very flat and very shallow in depth. When you have enough water into it, what does it do? It runs out of it. Well, everything here flows to the southeast, so when you have all the water in that watershed, guess what? It dumps over into the next watershed. And so what happened in 1934, big event in Houston, Texas, so Army Corps of Engineers, federal government, the city of Houston, the state of Texas said, we've got to build 2 reservoirs. So they built 2 reservoirs, but in fact, actually back then, that was the only project that was built through World War II and completed. It was the only one. And right after the war, we went to rebuilding the U.S. with infrastructure, and in fact, there was supposed to be a 3rd reservoir, or actually a large levee between I-10 and 290 to hold that water back. Well, as you know, that levee was never built. And so now you'll see a lot of discussion about we've got to have that happen. So if we talk about the road to recovery, and I think that was one of the points you'd asked me to talk about, the road to recovery means we have got to, as a community and as a state of Texas, buy out homes that have been flooded multiple times. They have to be removed, and people need to move to a higher area. And secondly, we've got to have that because this water has got to get out of the Houston area. Let me tell you, those reservoirs were essentially full. And what people don't know is that if they got breached, because all they are is an earthen dam, that means there's just earth, dirt. Now, I grew up on an old rice farm, so I know real well that when water keeps going over the top of a levee, eventually it swirls on the backside, it erodes it, and collapses it. Now, I've said this several times to people, and I'll say it here, not to try to scare people, but to make a point, is that we've had 2 flooding events that either mean our maps are wrong, or we don't have to worry about it for at least another 1,500 years, or maybe 10,000 years. Well, I'm not going to guess on the latter. Now, all of you know you can't build something for the worst event that will ever happen in the world. You can't do it. However, we've got to be wiser and ahead of time, because if one of those levees would have bust, you're talking about a 20-foot wall of water. And if you look on a map of the greater Houston area of every single key strategical asset, as in downtown, the port, talk about the airports, the medical center, and then let's talk about the lives that are in between that area. If you have a 20-foot wall of water coming to you, there is no rescue and there is no safety. The only asset in the Houston area that would survive such a apocalyptic type event was up in George Bush area. And so my point just being, in order for us to where do we go from here in the Houston area, we've got to make sure that we build the next reservoir, we've got to make sure that we purchase homes and we be able to get the water out of here, because I'm not the type of guy that thinks I don't have to worry about it for 1,500 more years. It's a very serious event, and so it's something that we've got to continue to think about and deal with. So with that, I want to just say again, thank you all for your support of the Houston Food Bank. Thank you for helping your neighbors in the community, because it is critical that we all work together. And I've been in politics a few years, so I've gotten to be what's called very jaded. I get tired of the bickering and the arguing and everybody pointing fingers at others. It's somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's doing the wrong. But to watch what Texans helped each other during that days made me very proud that I get to call Texas home. The question is, now that the cameras are gone, are we going to continue to do what we did over those days? Because we still have a lot of work to do here in the Houston area. So thank you all, good to see you, and thank you again for your support.